Welcome, everyone. Pleased to have you here with us today for episode 92 of This is CDR. This is CDR is an online event series presented by OpenAir to explore the range of carbon removal solutions currently being researched, developed, and deployed, and to contextualize them for policy proposals OpenAir seeks to advance here in the US, really at every level of government, as well as in national and subnational jurisdictions globally. My name's Toby Bryce, based in Brooklyn, New York, and I work on policy and market development for OpenAir. If you haven't done so already, please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're zooming in from, if you'd like your affiliation, and make sure you direct that message to everyone and not just hosts and panelists. Quick background on OpenAir. We're a distributed all-volunteer network dedicated to the responsible advancement of CDR. We are a global community working together on shared projects that we call missions in the areas of policy, innovation, communications, and activist market development. My co-host and colleague, Megha Raghavan, is running the chat, and she'll put some links in there where you can get some background on our organization. There's a link that you can fill out a form to join our group. We'd love to have you be a part of what we're doing. Here's a snapshot of some active missions we have going, again, in those 4 different areas. Lots going on. You can start your own projects. It's a platform, open source, that really trying to sort of drive and amplify and accelerate climate action. One of our really important projects happening right now that's really at a moment of kind of in the balance is a state-level CDR procurement bill called the Massachusetts Carbon Dioxide Removal Leadership Act, S2096. We are working on it now. It has a chance to actually get passed this spring. So it's really kind of a critical time. If you live in Massachusetts, please reach out. We'd love to get your help, as many constituents as possible, speaking to the representatives about this important bill. As always, we would like to define our terms. Here's a definition of CDR from a great resource called the CDR Primer. Anthropogenic purposeful human activity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs or in long-lived products. This is essentially the same definition that the IPCC uses, and we think it's important to kind of align on a single definition of this term, and this is one we like to work with. Whenever we talk about CDR, it's really important to call out loudly, clearly from the rooftops and repeatedly, as we do on this program, probably to the boredom of regular listeners, is that CDR is in no way, shape, or form any sort of substitute for rapid decarbonization, rapid and deep reductions of global greenhouse gas emissions. That is the vast majority of our climate work, 90+%. We need to be doing it now as quickly as possible. We can't let CDR distract from that effort. That said, there's clear scientific consensus that CDR is a necessary climate solution. It will be required at multi-gigaton scale, billions of tons per year, approximately the size of the current oil and gas sector by mid-century. We need to start building that capability in that industry now, and that's what the sector is really focused on. We are not trying to take the eye off the ball of emissions reductions, but we need to start developing CDR solutions now so we can scale to millions and eventually billions of tons by mid-century. It's the work that we're here. That's what we're here to discuss. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Megha Raghavan, who is going to talk a little bit about the show and introduce today's presenter. Megha.
Hello, hi. I'm Megha. I'm an OpenAir member based in London, and I work on policy and market development as well. So just quick housekeeping notes before we start. We're going to have a short presentation to begin with, and that'll be followed by a few prepared questions, and then we'll have moderated audience Q&A. So as we go along, please just type any questions you have into the Q&A box in Zoom. It is separate from the chat box, so please try to find the right one just to help us manage that a little bit better. We are also recording the event, so we'll send the recording out to everyone who registered. We'll also be posting it to OpenAir's website and OpenAir's YouTube channel. All right, this week we're very pleased to welcome Banyu Carbon co-founder Dr. Alex Gagnon to present and discuss the company's novel photochemical CDR process to capture carbon dioxide from seawater. Dr. Alex Gagnon has a PhD in chemistry from Caltech, as well as a BS from UC-Berkeley. He is an expert in marine carbon and was recognized with the National Science Foundation Career Award. He shared his work with President Obama and as an invited panelist for the National Academies. He's deeply involved in marine carbon removal research, both in his academic and now his business roles. He is on leave from his faculty duties at the University of Washington to advance Banyu, the CDR technology developed with co-founder Julian Sachs. When not working on Banyu, Alex loves to run, hike, and garden with his family. So Alex, whenever you're ready, feel free to come on.
Excellent. Thank you for that introduction. And I feel really honored to be here and to be joined by a bunch of the colleagues in this field that are really trying to push carbon removal forward. I would usually also be joined by my co-founder, Julian Sachs, but he's recovering from COVID. And I'm joining you from Seattle, which is not so sunny, which is a little bit ironic given that we are developing a sunlight-based process. So I'm going to share a few slides here to sort of introduce our process, and then that can kick off the Q&A. And so Julian and I formed Banyu Carbon to commercialize what we think is a fundamentally new, energy efficient, and simple approach for direct carbon dioxide removal from seawater. And instead of electrochemical approaches, which has been making really rapid advances in this area, we use sunlight to drive a chemical reaction that causes CO2 to be released from seawater. So in its simplest terms, our process is designed to use seawater, or for that matter, river water, as an input, because as many of you know, seawater is naturally rich in CO2 and naturally concentrates CO2 from the atmosphere. We then do direct carbon dioxide removal from this natural seawater through a light-triggered chemical reaction. And this then can produce a easily measured stream of carbon dioxide that can be geologically sequestered or used as a feedstock for industrial processes like the production of sustainable fuels. And because it's a direct CO2 removal approach, that means that it's easier verification than many other approaches, and there's clear additionality. Although, as we'll discuss, there's of course still important aspects of MRV related to air-sea gas exchange. Our process is light triggered, but we can take advantage of the energy and sunlight to do different tasks. We use the blue light in sunlight to drive our process, but we can simultaneously use the other parts of the spectrum to generate electricity using photovoltaics, which means that we're projected to cover all our energy needs of our process and even produce electricity in net with a relatively compact footprint. So in summary, our process is designed to remove CO2, the root cause of climate change and ocean acidification, from seawater. We produce a decarbonated stream of seawater that's chemically unchanged other than having less CO2 in it. And this decarbonated water takes up CO2 from the atmosphere. So, most of this really educated crowd on carbon removal is familiar with direct carbon removal from seawater. I think Carbon Blue presented in the fall, and of course, Captura and others have been presenters before. And so like these approaches, we take advantage of the fact that the oceans are an incredible resource when it comes to carbon removal. So for the surface ocean, carbon removal in many places is effectively similar to carbon removal directly from the atmosphere. This is, as you're probably familiar with, because of the relatively rapid exchange of CO2 between the atmosphere and the surface ocean, and the timescale is several months to a year. And so as long as the water exiting our process stays in the upper ocean and in contact with the atmosphere for months to a year on a similar timescale, which is the case for much of the surface ocean and many of the places that we want to site our facilities, then this exchange will occur. So I think it's useful to dig in a little bit more about this. And so to sort of explore that concept a little bit more, I want to do a thought experiment. And imagine not that you're doing a direct ocean capture play, but that you're doing direct air capture. You've invented an air capture plant to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. You can pull directly out of the top box here. This will result in a deficit in atmospheric CO2 with respect to ocean exchange. And because of this deficit with respect to ocean exchange will cause the surface ocean to absorb less and in effect burp back up CO2 to replace some of the CO2 that's removed. So direct air capture pulls CO2 from the atmosphere, but it's simultaneously pulling CO2 out of the ocean too because of air-sea gas exchange. Similarly, if you're doing direct ocean capture, you're pulling from both these boxes too. And so both of these are pulling from both boxes. They're effectively a similar, have a similar effect. And for most climate models and many of the ways that when we think about the carbon cycle, we often bin the surface ocean and the atmosphere together when thinking about total carbon balance and total impact on climate. So because we are able to do direct ocean capture and as long as we pull from parts of the surface ocean that are in exchange with the atmosphere, relatively rapid exchange with the atmosphere, and stay in exchange for sufficiently long time periods, we can take advantage of many of the benefits of working with seawater as a source of CO2 while having a similar climate impact as direct air capture. So Instead of having to build large and expensive fan farms to act as gas contactors, we take advantage of the ocean surface as a natural collector and concentrator of CO2. And I think a key thing here is that the technology to process seawater on a massive scale is really well developed. Pumping seawater is old tech. Facilities like once through cooled power plants pump large volumes of seawater at a massive scale and have been doing so for decades, going on to a century. And so these are an opportunity, partnering with facilities like these are an opportunity to turn what's effectively a waste stream into a source of carbon removal and potentially a source of revenue. So some of the advantages of working with seawater is that compared to pulling carbon dioxide from the air comes from the fact that air and the CO2 is just a trace gas, and it's just hard to unmix. It's hard to beat that entropy. You know, when you're trying to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, there's 2,000 other molecules or atoms in the way, and sorbents that have the binding energy to pull the CO2 out of the air and unmix it typically need a lot of energy to release this CO2. And that's a major contributor of the energy needs and cost of direct air capture. In contrast, dissolved inorganic carbon is more abundant in seawater than all other dissolved gases. So, you know, we flipped sort of what's the trace component here. And through our technique and similar pH swing techniques, it's relatively easy to liberate this carbon dioxide from seawater. So most of the carbon in seawater occurs as protonated and hydrated forms. That's sort of shown here as bicarbonate and carbonate ions. CO2 is typically a minor species, and that's why seawater stores so much carbon dioxide. And every direct carbon dioxide removal from seawater process that I'm aware of relies on some sort of temporary pH modification to extract this CO2. In our process and several others, temporary acidification can convert all the dissolved forms of inorganic carbon to CO2, at which point this CO2 will spontaneously exit the solution. And it's easy to extract this CO2 from seawater at scale using commercially available off-the-shelf gas contacting systems. So in short, all direct CO2 removal processes are basically solving the problem of how to do this temporary pH swing or a temporary acidification step with really low energy, right? The energy is an issue because that's where a lot of the energy comes in for other carbon removal processes. You know, several electrochemical processes literally split water in an effort to make acids. They're doing all this redox chemistry when really all they're looking for is the acids and bases needed to do this sort of step. So we have a totally different approach that's not electrochemical. And this allows us to do this pH swing, this temporary acidification in a really energy efficient way that's directly coupled to light. So at the heart of our technology is the use of a class of molecules called reversible photoacids. We do this to temporarily acidify seawater. So this special class of molecules, when exposed to light, change their shape. So visible light interacts with this molecule and it makes it change its shape. And when it changes its shape, it changes its chemical behavior. And when it changes its shape, it becomes 1,000 times more acidic. And for those non-chemists out there, that when you're acidic, you release a proton, which is just a charged hydrogen atom, is what chemists mean when we're talking about acidity. And so when this molecule absorbs a photon of visible light, it changes shape and it kicks out a proton. It becomes really acidic. We can then transfer that acidity to seawater, causing it to liberate CO2. And then the really useful property of this molecule is then when it's no longer exposed to light, it relaxes back to its ground state. It relaxes back to its previous form so that it can be reused for the next cycle. And when it relaxes back to its previous form, it wants to pull back a proton. And we can use this as part of a cycle to drive carbon dioxide removal using the power of sunlight. And so this excitation of our molecule is nearly instantaneous. And then the activated form lasts for several minutes, so long enough to do important work. And it's currently stable. The forms, the molecules that we're using are currently stable for about 10 days under operational conditions. But there's a lot of advances that are being done to extend that lifetime. Its activity is retained over thousands of cycles. It can be used many times. It's a small molecule with a simple synthesis out of inexpensive starting materials. It's very similar to dye molecules that are produced industrially at a massive scale. There's no metals or rare elements in these molecules. We keep these photoacids completely separate from seawater, and not that much photoacid is required for our process. At steady state, we expect about a half a kilo or so of photoacid needed per ton per year capacity in the models, the process models of our system that we've developed. And even when you account for degradation, that results in we're projecting a few kilograms of photoacid being required for each ton of CO2 removed. So putting all these pieces together into a process, we take advantage of the vast amount of carbon that's trapped in seawater as an input. And our simple low energy process liberates this carbon from seawater by temporarily acidifying it. That's analogous to a lot of pH swing direct carbon dioxide removal processes. That converts this dissolved carbon dioxide to CO2 gas, which is efficiently removed through a gas contactor as a stream of CO2 that can be easily verified, geologically stored, and or utilized. And so to do this process, to sort of trigger this process to cause the temporary pH swing, we're exposing our photoacid to visible light. It changes conformation, which makes it acidic, which releases these protons. The protons are then transferred to seawater through a process that keeps the photoacid separate from seawater. And then when they're no longer exposed to light, they relax back to their ground state for use in the next cycle. And then when the protons that were temporarily transferred to seawater are no longer necessary, they return to the photoacid. So as the photoacid relaxes, it has a really high affinity for these protons. It's changed its acidity by 1,000-fold. It's now no longer acidic. And I don't mean to anthropomorphize molecules, but it sort of wants that proton back. That allows us to clean up after ourselves, pull the proton out of solution, such that we just release decarbonated water to seawater. That has the only change that's happened in net is that we remove carbon dioxide, the root cause of climate change, from that seawater, so that it can go on and absorb more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The ocean mixes quickly, but the decarbonated water has the added benefit that, at least probably in a local area, it can help likely counteract some of the impacts of ocean acidification. We're basically rolling back the clock, pulling CO2 out of seawater, sort of the opposite of ocean acidification. And in the lab and field prototypes that we've developed and tested in our lab, we've demonstrated carbon removal using natural sunlight. And we've used natural seawater to demonstrate that each of the key parts of our process work as modeled and as expected, using all industrially scalable approaches. One of the, I think, one of the really exciting things about working with sunlight in these photoacids is that we can use sunlight to do multiple jobs. And because the photoacid absorbs mainly blue light, much of the visible light energy in sunlight can pass through our reaction. You can sort of think in schematic form as our process requiring photoacid to interact with the sunlight as a thin layer of fluid that has photoacid in it, and that light passes through it. And the light that's required for the photoacid reaction is absorbed, but the remainder of the spectrum is available and can pass through that thin layer on the order of about a centimeter layer. And it can be used for generate electricity. And there's a really nice complementarity in that the part of the spectrum that we use for our photoacid is also the part of the spectrum that really cheap photovoltaic cells are not tuned to use really well. So there's a really good complementarity there. So the visible light energy that passes through our process can be used to generate electricity by embedding these inexpensive solar cells beneath our photoreactors. And we project that this can cover our energy needs and even produce energy in net with our for our process, which is a major advantage, we think, over competing carbon removal processes that can often be really energy intensive. And so with this attenuation of light, because of the photoacid, we predict that the photovoltaics would sort of operate at sort of 60% of the efficiency that they would if there was nothing obstructing them. And really importantly, because we're already collecting all this light for our process, we're not using any new land to do this photovoltaics. We're sort of taking advantage of the infrastructure we already have to use to collect light and just being able to, for very little marginal extra cost, insert photovoltaics into our system, but with a large marginal benefit. So our process is projected to require a lot less energy than competing processes. And this is really because of a number of factors. It's relatively simple, and also because we directly couple sunlight to carbon removal. And furthermore, with photovoltaic integration, we expect to produce energy in net. So here is the plot of our projected energy required in kilowatt hours per ton, assuming that we continue to hit our milestones, and this is sort of projected out to about 24 months of continued development. This is in green is including photovoltaics, but even without photovoltaics, our gross energy needs shown here in red are projected to be better than best-in-class competitors like the best-in-class direct air capture, which is on the order of about 1,000 kilowatt hours per ton, and some of the electrochemical carbon removal from seawater processes. Our energy needs are even lower if we partner with facilities that already pump seawater. So those previous numbers that I showed you were including the cost of doing all our own seawater pumping ourselves, our sort of projected energy needs for that, as well as inclusive of our projections for the needs for compression of CO2, transport, and transport of that CO2. But our energy needs are even lower if we partner with facilities that already pump seawater, like I've mentioned, thermoelectric power plants or desal facilities. And so those are real, those potential partnerships are real beachhead markets. You know, being able to use existing seawater pumping capacity is a real advantage because we think that it can help us build out really quickly. We, as we'll sort of share here, our energy projections and our base energy projections and our costs, our TEA, assume that we're having to do our own pumping ourselves. So we don't have to partner with these facilities, but it's a real great pathway to get to market quickly. And to take advantage of the sort of embedded energy and infrastructure that already exists. We think that because of our low energy advantage and because of the relatively simple design of our process, we think that we can reach a levelized cost of $200 or so per ton removed if we continue to meet our milestones in our 2-year plan. And that includes the costs for all our own seawater pumping, as I mentioned, compression, transport, and also paying for geologic sequestration. And then we think that as we sort of develop our process, and this is using the standard, this is both based on our process model as well as using the standard learning curves that Frontier supplies for evaluating their projects. We think that we can reach a cost of less than $100 at the 1 million ton per year scale. And with an entitlement cost for an nth of kind projected to be well under $100 per ton. And then one of the real advantages of our process, and this is because of its low energy needs, also because of the net production of green electricity, our LCA predicts, and this is something, you know, that the LCAs are always something that they're continuing to improve on, but our LCA that we've tried to be pretty comprehensive with, tried our best to sort of include scope 1 through 3 emissions, suggests a really high efficiency for carbon removal that out of the 90 or more % of the carbon removed, of the carbon captured would translate into carbon removed when considering these emissions and the benefit of our net electricity generation. So this is this potential to have a really big impact, to have a really low energy process, to have a process that is potentially affordable, and therefore, you know, that's one of the key gates for being scalable and having market adoption is that it's affordable, and that it has this potential to have a real strong efficiency or net impact on climate was some of the reasons that made Julian and I step back from our faculty positions to really go all in on trying to develop this technology, because of the potential to not just study and catalog the impacts of climate that we'd been doing in our academic careers, but to really work on a technology that's fundamentally new that no one else was doing and try to help bring that to market to add to this collection of approaches that we're all trying to do to try to meet this really huge problem of carbon removal. So we feel really honored and lucky to have had developed a lot of great partners and had a lot of traction in this path, this journey of commercializing this company. We started it just under 2 years ago, and have been really lucky for the support that we have gained as Activate Fellows, and had a first pre-seed funding in May of 2022, and that was largely led by Grantham Foundation. And then we're really honored to be recognized by Frontier with a pre-purchase agreement that was funded by Stripe, Shopify, and HM Group for delivering 360 tons of carbon removal by 2026. Some of these have been announced, and some of these will be coming out shortly, but we're also really honored to have had non-dilutive funding and grants from National Science Foundation and the voucher program from Department of Energy. And then I can't share too many details about this yet, but we were able to put together a really incredible group of investors and recently closed a seed fundraising round just at the end of 2023. And so stand by for hearing more announcements about that. We're really excited about the team that we were able to put together to tackle this problem, and have a lot of energy and a lot of expertise that really complementary expertise that we think can help us commercialize and rapidly bring this solution to market, and bring it to help us do the engineering to really deploy it. So none of this could be possible without our team, and our success is really entirely driven by the amazing team that we've been able to assemble to work on this problem. And that's especially true of my co-founder, Julian Sachs. We're both faculty in chemical oceanography at the University of Washington, but stepped back from that position to be all in on developing this and commercializing this project. And lucky that we've been able to attract some really amazing talent as far as organic chemists and oceanographers and chemists to help us develop this process. And so key for a bunch of the lab work that we've done to date are our senior organic chemist. We have and our senior chemical oceanographer and research scientist on our team. We have great complementary expertise. But as we're developing this and bringing it into the field, we'll have a pilot demonstration at the ton per year scale here in 2026. We're really focused on building out our engineering team. And so we have open positions for director of engineering and mechanical engineer. We'll soon post additional engineering positions and field tech position, as well as a business development position on our website. So if you're excited by the challenge of working on carbon removal, and hopefully I've inspired you about the potential promise of our process, please reach out to us and apply to these positions. We'd really love to talk with you. All of this work really is driven by passionate and smart people, and that's one of the great joys of working in this space, is not just having the potential to have a real impact for the planet, but also to be able to work with really creative and driven people. So I'll pause there and really looking forward to the questions from the group.
That was great, Alex. Thank you so much. Super exciting. I think the sector at large is super excited about what you're working on, and congratulations on all your early successes. One quick question, point of clarification. I hadn't realized this, but your process does not require salinity, so you don't need seawater. You can work with any water source. Is that correct?
That's right. There's we focus on natural waters because many natural waters, seawater, and many rivers, but not all rivers or lakes, have relatively high dissolved inorganic carbon. There's some rivers that have even more dissolved inorganic carbon than seawater on a per volume basis. Rivers like the Mississippi, the Columbia, Danube can be a good source of carbon removal. There's aspects of the process that change with salinity, but there's no fundamental reason that our process can't work in those settings.
Excellent, thank you. Your idea is one of those sort of science fiction sounding ideas, capturing carbon with light. Can you talk a little bit about your intellectual journey, like how you started researching photoacids, and then when it occurred to you that, wow, I can use this for carbon removal, and then maybe a little bit about how you and Julian got together to form the company?
Yeah. So I'll start from the end there, because I think that's really the journey. So Julian and I, are faculty that work together, and we've been collaborators for almost a decade, since 2014. And We've worked primarily together on the impacts of ocean acidification on marine life and coral reefs. And so we had a study site in the South Pacific that we've been working closely on together with, and worked with a bunch of students and scientists out there. And as part of that project, we were developing it sort of started to shift into more engineering. We were trying to test the impacts of ocean acidification, the conditions at sort of near end of century on a patch of reef. And because of this, we were having to transfer lots of carbon dioxide into and out of seawater. And as we were sort of there working in the field, South Pacific sunsets, lead to really good sort of conversations. We sort of started framing this question of, okay, what if we were trying to scale this up even larger? We've been sort of trying to understand what it would take to move carbon in and out of seawater at a massive scale. What if we could sort of turn this on its head and try to use this as a carbon removal process? What would be required? And we really focused on the fact that temporary acidification step is high energy and it's awkward. What would sort of the class of what would be a new solution to try to solve and rewrite the energetics of that process? And so drawing on the organic chemistry experience of Julian and the aquatic chemistry experience that I have, we sort of were really searching for, we had sort of defined what we needed. And we got lucky that there had been recent advances in photoacids. So photoacids have been around for 50 plus years, of molecules that when you shine light on them, they become acidic. But prior to about 10 years ago, they recombined, or so that they made acidity, but then they recombined so quickly that there was no time for that proton to do work. And about a decade ago, there were some major advances in photoacids that allowed them to stick around in their acidic state long enough for them to do work. And these had been applied mostly in the biomedical and materials fields. And we recognized, oh man, this is a perfect fit for our problem. And then that sort of really, one thing led to the next. And we're really lucky to get a lot of support from our university, who saw commercialization as one way to have, as just an extension of our mission to have a positive impact on the planet, really supported us to take this commercialization journey, and Activate really helped us sort of try to challenge us to grow as quickly as a company grows entrepreneurs as quickly as our company has grown. Got it.
That's great. Thank you. Couple questions about the photoacid feedstock. So you said that a few kilograms per ton of CO2 capture. So I might think of that as maybe a 0.5% factor. So like on 1 million tons, you might have, is that cumulative over the course of a year? So if you do 1 million tons of capture over the course of a year from a facility, you will have 5,000 tons of residue photoacid.
Yeah, so there's a really good question, and let me clarify a few aspects of that. I think you're pretty much spot on, but it would help to dig into the details for you and for the audience here. So we project with our current sort of process model that we need about, at steady state, per ton per year capacity of a facility, we need at steady state about 400 grams, call that a half a kilogram of photoacid. So that's photoacid that's cycling around in a system, kept separate from seawater, being exposed to sunlight, being reused over and over and over again. But photoacids degrade through a known pathway where they hydrolyze, they split into two pieces. And so if you work with the amount of photoacid that you need for your process and then account for this degradation process, that means per ton of CO2 removed, we project that you would need about 2 kilograms of photoacid would be consumed. And that's sort of the sort of factor that you're talking about. However, that we got really lucky in that the degradation pathway, the way that the photoacid comes apart, yields two pieces, two molecules. And those are the two same molecules that are used during the last step of synthesis. And we've shown in lab that you can recover the photoacid from the process stream and recombine them to remake the molecule. And so that's not directly part of our TEA, and we still have to evaluate whether the cost benefit of recycling the photoacid outweighs synthesis of new photoacid. So there's important work to be done there, but that there's a pathway to reuse that photoacid as well. So we got really lucky there. Some degradation, some processes when they degrade, they turn into junk. In our case, it's a really useful product that can be recycled.
So it's possible that innovation in science could lead us to a point where you have a fully looping process.
Yeah, I mean, it is the photoacid is not consumed. The only reason that it's consumed is because of degradation. Just like any process, electrodes in an electrochemical system degrade over time. We just are trying to be as comprehensive in our view of thinking about inputs and outputs. And so this degradation pathway is really important.
And without that innovation, am I in the right order of magnitude that you might have 5,000 tons of waste residue photoacid per million tons of capture? Like, is that right?
Yeah, that's well, it's about 2 kilograms per ton, and so it feels like if it's a million, is it 2,000 tons per million there? Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Yes, I trust your mental math. You're further along in your day.
I was being a little conservative at 0.05%, not 0.02. Okay.
Oh, great.
You might have a small amount. And is this a toxic material? Like, what would you, if you had to get rid of it, what would you?
Yeah. So it's really common to the form of this is really common to textile. The structure is really similar to textile dyes, and one of the degradation products of the molecule is actually a FDA approved flavorant. And so we're, as we are developing new and advanced photoacids to improve their performance. And so, important work needs to be done to be really sure about the environmental impact if there were ever a leak of these photoacids, and to really assess the toxicology of these things. So that is important work that needs to continue to be done. But in our LCA, and when we think about our TEA, the burning with heat recovery of any waste, because the waste stream is really small compared to the carbon removal, that's accounted for as an emissions and cost in our TEA. Yeah.
And the photoacid is kept separate from the seawater or water by membranes. Is that correct?
Yeah, the photoacid is kept separate from seawater through an ion exchange process. When we first developed this process, our first prototype on the benchtop, we pulled off-the-shelf components just to make sure that the process worked as expected and that all the pieces sort of worked together. And for that, we used membranes for this process. But we quickly realized, that was sort of a proof of concept on prototype about a year or so ago. And we quickly realized that membranes are expensive. There's biofouling. It's just not as commercializable, not as scalable approach. And so one of the things that our team worked really hard on, and that we were successful in doing, was developing a version of the process where we don't use membranes for that ion exchange process. We rely on another industrially scalable, really widely used ion exchange process to separate the ions from seawater. And sorry, I can't dig a little too much.
That's IP. That's your IP, is this non-membrane separation mechanism.
Yeah.
And the hydrogen ions or protons, I'm not sure if my terminology is correct, can cross this separation layer and then return.
That's right.
Okay.
And kind of another neat aspect of this is we're able to sort of actually separate. We can separate in time and space the accumulation of those protons from when we have to use, from when we're acidifying seawater. So this means that we can charge up a bunch of protons during daylight hours and then discharge them continuously in seawater 24/7. That helps our CapEx and sort of operational aspects, means we're a little bit more buffered from sunlight, a cloud passing in front of the sun and things like that.
Got it. There are people who are smarter than I am who asked some questions about this in the Q&A, so I'm going to leave the rest to them and move on to a new topic. And just a reminder, we are going to do audience questions. We are not going to be able to answer audience questions that are in the chat because it gets too confusing. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. And if you put them in the chat, can you just copy them to the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as possible. Can we talk about, so the form factor of your photoreactor, I believe you said, is 1 meter by 1.7 meters, so 1.7 square meters, I think. How much capture does that module do?
Yeah.
Like, what I want to get to is, like, how much land do you require? How much land is a megaton?
Totally.
In a couple of years, or your future megaton scale deployment, like, how much land will that use?
Yeah, exactly. So we project that we need per ton per year capacity about 4.5 square meters of area. And our form factor is because most of the area of our process is collecting sunlight. It looks a lot like a solar collection facility. Now, so that sort of gives you an idea of sort of what we're looking at here. And so for a 1,000-ton per year facility, we expect to need about 1 American football field of area for our process. That's about 1.3 acres, right? And so if that's 1,000, then 1 million would be, scale that by 10 to the third. So
okay, help us out here. So it's 1,000 tons is an acre, 400-ish square meters.
Yep.
Wait, 4,000 square? Yeah, 4,000 square meters.
4,000 square meters. Yep, that's right.
Okay, so per hectare. Okay, so what's 1 million tons? That means 1 million times that is,
or 1,000 times that, because that was 1,000 tons per.
So 1,000 tons is an acre. So 1 million tons is 1 million acres.
Is 1,000 acres. Yeah.
Sorry, 1,000 acres. Duh.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And hectares. So that's 2 point. Okay. So, all right. 1,000 acres per megaton.
And I think what is important when sort of comparing to other processes is we have integrated into our process the energy production of our process. And so if you were to compare apples to apples, I think it's useful to compare our process to the footprint of, say, a DAC process that also has captive solar. So like, what would the total area be with captive solar? And so if you use sort of the area projections for a DAC facility from the National Academies 2019 study and include the captive solar that would be required to process to provide the energy facility, we're about 1/10 of the area requirements as DAC. Now, there's obviously more flexibility in sort of the different ways that energy could be pulled off the grid to support DAC. And so that area footprint expands or contracts and can go depending upon what your energy source is. But I think a really important aspect of our process is that as designed, it doesn't pull energy off the grid. It doesn't compete with greening the grid. It produces green energy in net. Right.
And so with this footprint, it's inclusive of your energy requirements, plus you're generating 250 kilowatt hours without, if you have to handle your own water handling per ton.
That's right. That's right.
Very
That's
cool.
what we're projecting. Yep.
Yeah, this is one of those that, like, it sounds amazing, sounds almost too good to be true. Like, what are the things, we're going to move on to audience questions in a second, but what are the big risks in your mind? Like, so you've presented a thesis for how this is going to work and how this is going to be amazing and deliver gigaton scale CDR in the next, 10 or 15 years. What are some of the things that can go wrong? What keeps you up at night? Like, what do you think are the biggest risks to you and Julian and the team to scaling this?
Yeah, I think some of the things that keep me up at night are probably things that keep a lot of us up at night. It's just the scale of the problem that we're talking about is massive, right? And the speed with which we need to reach these goals is really fast, right? Where, to have a climate impact. And so thinking about how do we build a team out quickly enough and so that we can really deploy this on timescales that we need for climate is one of the things that I think Julian and I spend the most time sort of thinking about. How are we doing this quickly enough? How are we building this? And just sometimes there's moments where you take a step back and you're thinking, man, this is a massive, whether you're direct air capture or direct ocean capture, like, these are massive amounts of fluids that we're talking about, whether it's air or water that we're talking about, right? It's just a lot of water. And it helps reassure me when I have those moments that I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh my gosh, what are we trying to do here? It helps me to compare that to the amounts of water that are already being processed, right? So like we project that for 1 million ton facility, that takes about the seawater handling capacity of 2 of the largest existing seawater processing facilities. So like the Jubail facility in Saudi Arabia processes enough seawater daily to have a capacity of 500,000 tons of CO2 removed using our process. And that's conservatively assuming we're only removing 50% of DIC, not 100% DIC removal.
And beyond this sort of massive scale challenge that I think everyone in carbon removal faces, do you feel like there are any technology risks, techno-economic risks, social acceptance risks that you're particularly concerned about? Or do you feel like those are all manageable?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think that what we're trying to do is tough. We're developing a new technology and trying to deploy it quickly. It's sort of like the moonshot or the Manhattan Project at the same time as doing the US highway system, all in like a really short period of time. So there's a ton of technical issues that we think a lot about. We're trying to marshal our team to work on those, photoacid performance improvements, really make a difference, extending the lifetime of the photoacid. There's a bunch of commercially used molecules that are really similar that have lifetimes of 2 years. We think there's a path there. And there's been some recent great work that's sort of in our lab and elsewhere that has shown that we can extend the life. That really helps our TEA. So I think there's a bunch of things that we are really focused on that we know we need to achieve to get from here to there. But we think that we have paths for most of those. You bring up social acceptance. I think that's obviously really, really, really important. I talked about the build out of the interstate highway system. When that was done, it separated communities. There's been after effects of that we're still feeling. And as we develop this completely new industry, we have to deploy in a way where the communities that are most impacted by climate change are receiving the benefits of this new industry. And that's an added really important challenge that we take really seriously. The reason Julian and I stepped away from our academic roles was to have a positive impact on the planet. That means positive impact on the planet, positive impact on ecosystems, positive impact on people, right? And so I think that is a whole question in itself. We can delve deeper into this. I want to provide some time for questions, but we think that we have some aspects of our process, the fact that we don't pull from the grid, that we're a good member of the community, that we can put energy back in the grid, that allows us to site in maybe places that are not as close to services as others, which means that we could bring jobs and infrastructure to communities that are usually disserved, otherwise underserved. We think there's a bunch of advantages to our process that might help with that, but it's a big challenge.
Amen. Yes. Well, great answer. Thank you. Just one quick thing before we move to audience questions, actually two. Did you say, just to like your sort of like optimistic scaling schedule, did you say a ton a year in 2026?
Yeah. We hope to have a pilot in 2024 that's at the 1 ton per year capacity. Okay. And then we have a pre-purchase agreement with Frontier to deliver 360 tons by end of 2026. We have really ambitious milestones to be building out capacity dramatically.
And what are the sort of optimistic milestone years for 10,000 tons and 1 million tons?
I mean, I think that we hope to get to the 10,000 tons in the late 2020s, 2030. And I think all of us are trying to scale to 1 million tons to hundreds of million tons as fast as we can.
Got it. Excellent. And one other, we have so many audience questions. Do you have a hard stop at the top of the hour, or could you stay an extra 5 minutes to do a few more questions?
I'd be happy to.
Hey, we'll do that then. Great. Well, thank you so much. And Mega, do you want to hop on?
Hey, yes, we do have tons of questions. I'm just going to start with one. We got a couple of questions about membranes. So basically asking, how is the proton harvested and returned to the photoacid pool without cross-contaminating the seawater and other things with other chemistry? Are you using membranes? And can you just talk a little bit about how that's implemented, if so?
Yeah, so effectively what the problem is that you have to do an ion exchange process. You have to get protons in and out of seawater. For charge balance, there's cations that are moving back and cations like sodium that are moving in the opposite sort of pathway. So fundamentally what the problem is an ion exchange process. And membranes have a bunch of advantages in doing this. That's what our first off-the-shelf prototype proof of principle system used. We quickly saw that was not the most cost-effective way to go, and we put a lot of energy into developing alternative approaches. We explored a bunch of different ways that are used at an industrial scale to do the ion exchange process, and our process now relies on one of those approaches. Sorry, I can't delve too much more into those details at this time, but what I've been really happy with what we've done as a team is we've moved from that proof of principle to a prototype that uses all industrially scalable approaches now.
Okay, got it. And are you able to talk a little bit about the sort of change in pH that happens from like the starting point to the undersaturated seawater that you release at the end of it?
Yeah, I see. So less the photoacid, I don't think this is a question, but there's, the photoacid changes its pKa by 3, so it's a 1,000-fold change in acidification. What I think the questioner is asking about is what is the change in pH between a natural fluid going into the process, treat your process as a black box, what is the pH coming out of the process? And that's sort of a fundamental aspect of aquatic chemistry, or how the relationship between dissolved carbon and pH in seawater that is true irrespective of which process you're using. So just treat direct carbon removal as a black box, whether it's us or an electrochemical process. If we're not adding anything, that's, I think, a big advantage of our processes. We're not doing ocean alkalinity enhancement. We're not adding any material to seawater. We're pulling out carbon dioxide. So if you have a process that just pulls out carbon dioxide, then pulling out carbon dioxide is like the opposite of ocean acidification, right? During ocean acidification, extra carbon dioxide goes into seawater, makes it more acidic. If you just pull out carbon dioxide, you make your pH more basic. And so if the seawater that's immediately released by our process will have a pH that's elevated compared to the seawater coming into the process. That's just a result of the chemistry of carbon dissolved in seawater. And so the extent with which you pull carbon dioxide out of the process will determine what that pH is. Now, our process we've demonstrated on the benchtop can remove 97% we can remove 90% of the CO2 from the incoming seawater, but that leads to too high of pH processes. And there's some other aspects of our process that are more efficient when we just remove 50% of our seawater. And so that leads to a pH. So the pH can kind of be dialed in by how much of the carbon that you remove through your process. That's a balance between technoeconomics and sort of how quickly you think that pH will be mixed and dissipate in the surrounding environment. So if you pull 50% of the DIC from seawater, that leads to a pH of 9.5. If you pull less, you would have lower pH.
Okay, so it's kind of a function of how you control the process. It's not like a determined thing.
That's right. And the reason that you wouldn't go to too high of pH is in part that you don't want to cause precipitation of carbonates or magnesium hydroxide or other minerals that would mess with the process. That can sometimes be an issue in an electrochemical process where locally you make really, really extreme pHs. Our process doesn't do that. And so we think we can keep our pH within bounds that are both technically useful and ecologically appropriate.
Okay, yeah, someone did ask, is precipitation a problem? But I guess, is it just the case that you can control for that and keep that from being a problem?
That's right. That's right. You can keep the pH because we never reach too low of pHs in our process. And the exiting seawater doesn't really reach the threshold where nucleation of those minerals is an issue. You can take some seawater and titrate its pH up to 9.5. You won't see any murkiness. A former graduate student worked a lot on nucleation rates in seawater, so we have some pretty good bounds on that.
Got it. Okay. And then sort of on the flip side, someone asked, could you intentionally drive up the pH and try to precipitate calcium carbonate so that you don't have to deal with the storage side? Is that a possible way of doing this?
Yeah, so precipitation of that's an important question to address. Precipitation of calcium carbonate from seawater with no other inputs leads to a loss of alkalinity from the surface ocean. It's like the opposite of ocean alkalinity enhancement. So in net, you're drawing down alkalinity, which affects the acid-base chemistry of water in such a way that it actually puts CO2 into the atmosphere. So if not properly balanced by other inputs in the system, precipitation of calcium carbonate through high pH will actually do kind of the opposite of what we want. Right. There's some creative approaches that have another alkalinity source to balance that. So you can bring some pieces together to overcome some of those challenges, but that's a reason why precipitation of calcium carbonate through our process is not likely to have the intended benefit that I think the questioner sort of was asking.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, I know you talked about potentially using seawater versus freshwater earlier. Someone was asking if you could use cooling tower water since it's being pumped anyway, and also CO2 saturated most probably. Is that something you could consider as a beachhead market, adding onto power plants?
Yeah, we haven't looked into that. There's some really Seattle-based. There's some really cool Seattle-based approaches that are taking advantage of cooling water. I think that's a really creative way to be able to work with existing infrastructure. I think that we haven't looked at that into detail. It's a great suggestion. Yeah.
Cool. All right. I have still lots of questions, but I'll try to get to a few more. So are there any other compounds or like nutrients or anything else that's in the environment that changes form when it gets acidified that you might have to be concerned about, with respect to ecological effects as you're carrying out your process?
Yeah, it's important. The bigger question of making sure that you're a good ecological steward, something that we think a lot about. And it's chemical oceanographers, it's people that study the ocean, right? That's really centered to our heart.
Sure.
The specific question of are there nutrients, for instance, that might change their form as a function of pH? There are some forms, for instance, of nitrogen, like ammonia, that are pH sensitive. In some of these ranges, I don't think that is likely to be a major impact in our process, and I don't dismiss that. I'm not being dismissive of that. I think it's an important question, but I think that aspects of our process are that we produce low pH water, but the ocean mixes so darn quickly. I mean, this is part of the challenge with MRV, actually measuring the pH difference once the outflow mixes with the environment. Even measuring the pH difference is a challenge. That's why modeling is such an important part of MRV for all these ocean-based approaches that likely impact on nutrients like nitrogen nutrients is unlikely to be a big deal. The main nitrogen-containing nutrient, nitrate, is unlikely to be affected by acid-base chemistry.
Right. Okay. Right. We had a few questions about, I guess, the use of photovoltaics. Are you going to use, anything off the shelf for PV, or do you have to develop this in a specific way to kind of integrate it with the photoreactor that you have? And relatedly, do you foresee any kind of supply chain issues around procuring that at scale?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the key engineering challenges that we're building our team around, and that we've been really trying to articulate and solve, is how do we build this in a way that can be deployed rapidly? So it can be assembled by labor that's going to be available in the community, and it can be assembled rapidly and at scale for the cost targets that we need. And the solar industry has developed how to build solar farms really effectively at scale. It's kind of impressive, right? It's a real inspiration for, wow, this is how a field that started at high cost can transition to having a real impact on the planet. So there's a modality, there's a form factor of our system where we bolt on, we literally, are trying to design our system to bolt on to existing solar panels. And in which case we can hopefully take advantage of a bunch of that infrastructure. And so that, in that case, the engineering design would be, how do you do that in a way that's really scalable, that it's resilient, that it doesn't, invalidate any warranties, and, that it's very bankable, that it can sort of plug into project financing. So that's one mode. On the other hand, we have to move fluids, and that's a pretty dispersed system. And so we have sort of competing teams or competing modalities that we're working on for how to deploy the solar component. And one mode that we're working with is solar concentration. And that involves a little bit more of our own design of how to integrate photovoltaics. And the trade-offs there are really cost benefit and engineering and how quickly we deploy, whether we do whether we integrate into our own design or whether we're able to piggyback on photovoltaics. And that really comes down to costs and deployment, and is a place that we're working actively to solve that problem, and working hard to develop our team of employees and consultants to help us solve that problem.
Okay, got it. And then just thinking about, at the end of the process, so you want to store the carbon dioxide. Have you thought about what mode of storage you're going to go for? And this person specifically asked, are you looking at gas or liquid phase distribution, but maybe just more generally as well?
Yeah. So our TEA assumes compression of CO2 to supercritical form and transport through pipelines, and the sort of typical cost of geologic sequestration. Our process is well adapted to different sort of also being able to produce CO2 in aqueous form that could be used for mineralization. Our sort of read on things is that mineralization is this incredible resource, and is definitely going to be a major part of sort of the way that things go forward, but maybe a little bit behind the geologic sequestration of supercritical CO2. but would love to talk with people to get smarter about that. So we tried to sort of pick what we think is the most costly or most likely to be deployable most immediately, which is geologic sequestration of supercritical CO2. But I think that, as a capture company that produces CO2, we can sort of tune our process to produce CO2 of different forms and purities, we think. And so we can sort of match with a bunch of different processes and utilization too. We produce electricity and CO2, which are basically the feedstocks for sustainable fuels, and really excited about helping to plug into that sort of nascent industry and hopefully build the building blocks that they need to sort of unlock their ability to upscale carbon.
Yeah, great. Makes a lot of sense. I'll just do probably two more and then I will let you go. So just on the panels themselves, are they all submerged in seawater, and is there like an issue of corrosion with that?
Yeah, thank you. I should have actually hit this. Our likely deployment form for the near future is onshore, is not offshore. It's to partner with existing facilities that already pump seawater, take advantage of the brownfields, the areas around these facilities. Julian and I have toured places, seen and talked with power plants, and it's surprising how much space there actually is around some of these to be able to develop and deploy our sunlight collection systems. And so there's nothing about our process that requires that it is stuck on land, and there's real advantages to working offshore. But also, as oceanographers, we know how hard it is to work offshore, how some of the issues that the questioner sort of brought up come up. We think that the easier path for deployment and rapid scale up is being onshore next to seawater or river water is the pathway to really sort of scale this up before we tackle the larger engineering challenge of offshore.
Okay, great. And last question, could you tell us the story behind the name? Someone asked that, and I think I'd love to.
Oh yeah. So Banyu Carbon. Julian does a lot of work in his academic career in Pacific Islands. And Banyu is there's many dialects in Indonesia and Malaysia, but it's one of the dialects, it's the word for water.
Yep, great. Cool. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really great. And Toby, I'll hand it back to you to talk about what's coming next.
Excellent. Thank you, Mega. Thank you, Alex. Really appreciate you being with us. That was fantastic. Super exciting to learn more about Banyu, and wishing you, Julian, a speedy recovery, and wishing you guys all the best with your next steps. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Really, really great to be here.
And thank you for staying a few minutes extra. There were so many questions. So I am going to share my screen very briefly. I put a link in the chat to our Luma page, which we have moved on to from Eventbrite. And we have several This is CDRs booked in the coming weeks. AirHive, one of Banyu's Frontier Summer 23 purchase cohort mates, direct air capture based in the UK, our friend Rory. So super excited about that. Actually all of these guys are in the Frontier portfolio. Alkali Earth, Holocene, and then B0 in March to talk about how we're gonna do ratings for carbon removal. Thank you all for being with us. Again, there's a link in the chat to register for all of the upcoming This is CDRs. Here's Rory and Jasper next week with AirHive. And we really appreciate you being with us. And again, thank you so much to Alex for his time today and for sharing all that great information about Banyu. Be well, and we'll see you in a week.